In this video, we're going to be looking at the human heart. This is lecture 1 of a 2-part series, so stay tuned for part 2. Before we begin, I just want you guys to have a look at the human heart. We'll get back to this diagram, but just take a look at it and try to comprehend as much as you can without knowing about it at all. So, the heart is a fist-shaped organ that pumps blood across the body. It has 4 chambers: the left atrium, left ventricle, right atrium, right ventricle. It also has a dividing wall known as the septum. It has vena cavas and aortas. We'll be looking into each of these individually right now. But in order to understand the heart, we have to understand what blood is. Blood is known as fluid connective tissues, and it's the human transport system. The blood is the source of our waste, nutrients, and oxygen, and it transports it all across the body. So, obviously the blood can't travel on its own, and it needs to be pumped through some sort of force. And that force is provided by the heart, and it pumps the blood to reach its destination. So, we can divide the heart into 2 broad divisions. First, we have the left side of the heart and the right side of the heart. The left side of the heart only deals with blood that is rich in oxygen, and the right side of the blood deals with blood that is carbon dioxide rich, meaning that it's oxygen deoxygenated. So a detailed process includes: first, the blood that's oxygen rich enters the left side of the heart through the pulmonary veins, and the left atrium is the source that it enters. So from the lungs, it enters the pulmonary veins. When the left atrium relaxes, the blood is collected, and when it contracts, the left ventricle opens up to collect the blood. From the left ventricle, the blood leaves the body through a vein known as the aorta, and then is sent to the destination where oxygen is required. In the right side, the similar approach takes place, except carbon dioxide rich blood, meaning that wasted blood, enters the body through the inferior vena cava, which blood from the lower body enters, and the superior vena cava, in which blood from the upper body enters. They enter the right atrium while it's relaxing, and then when the right ventricle dilates and the right atrium shrinks or contracts, the blood is collected in the right ventricle, which is this chamber over here. And then finally it leaves the body through the pulmonary arteries, and it goes back to the lungs for the blood to be oxygenated. The septum here is the dividing wall, a thick wall that prevents the oxygen-rich blood from mixing with the carbon dioxide-rich blood. The left side is usually denoted as a red color, and the right side is denoted as a blue color. So as I mentioned earlier, the lungs oxygenate blood, which is then sent to the left chamber of the heart, and the carbon-rich blood, or the deoxygenated blood, is sent to the right chamber and then pumped to the lungs. It's a continuous rhythmic cycle, which can be more understood when we look at this double circuit diagram. So how does blood move across the body? The heart pumps the blood, but it has different blood vessels that form the circulatory system. The circulatory system comprises of arteries, veins, and capillaries, which we'll be looking at very soon. Arteries transport oxygenated blood from the heart to the rest of the body, and veins transport deoxygenated blood from the body to the heart, and then pump to the lungs. So arteries and veins are completely opposite. They have opposing functions and opposing structures as well. As you can see here, in arteries, they carry oxygenated blood away from the heart to the body where it's required, whereas veins carry carbon-rich blood to the heart. Thick walls comprise arteries because the blood is pumped at high diastolic pressures through the heart, whereas the veins have thin walls as the blood flows at a normal pressure However, veins have valves to prevent backward flow of blood. Arteries are heart to body, veins are body to heart. And as I mentioned earlier, arteries are red in color and veins are blue. This 3D diagram should really give you a better idea of how the heart works. Over here we have the pulmonary veins, the superior vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and the aorta. It's not completely visible, but it gives you a better idea in a three-dimensional view rather than the 2D view. So as you can see, it's about fist-sized, and as you can see here, the veins are quite thin-walled, whereas this aorta here, which is a artery, is quite thick. So the double circulation system gives you a much better idea of how blood moves through the body. So the center organ here is the heart. On the top we have the lungs, and on the bottom we have the body tissues. So as I mentioned earlier, we have these pulmonary veins. So you may be thinking, why would oxygen-rich blood be entering through the veins? So in terms of veins and arteries, there's one exception. The pulmonary veins, they carry oxygen-rich blood. That's the one exception. And the pulmonary arteries are the one exception that carry deoxygenated blood. So, now let's look at the path. So in the lungs, blood is oxygenated, and it flows through the pulmonary vein and enters the left atrium. From the left atrium, it enters the left ventricle, and then it flows up through this artery called the aorta. And through the aorta, it flows down through these blood tissues, and these are known as capillaries. And then finally, when the oxygen is utilized, it flows down through the vena cava, the inferior vena cava, and the superior vena cava, and it enters the right atrium and then the right ventricle. Then finally leaves those here and enters the lung capillaries. So now you may be wondering what capillaries are. When the arteries and veins reach their desired location, they divide into much smaller tissues called capillaries. Capillaries are actually a type of blood vessel that can be found in the circulatory system, and they facilitate easier diffusion of blood between each and every cell. So the veins, once they reach the lungs, they divide into lung capillaries, and when the arteries reach the blood tissues, they divide into tissue capillaries. So instead of just sending all the blood all at once to the lungs or the veins, they divide into these smaller vessels in which they can easily diffuse oxygen. They can give oxygen and take carbon dioxide as quick as possible. So you may be wondering, why does the heart have 4 chambers? It creates a highly efficient supply of oxygen, and it releases higher amounts of energy, which is required for all mammals because they require the high energy to regulate their body temperature. Also, the 4 chambers and the thick septum, which is a dividing wall, prevents the oxygen-rich and carbon dioxide-rich blood from mixing with each other. And if they do mix up with each other, it could cause huge problems. Also, some other cold-blooded mammals, such as fish, they can suffice with only 2 chambers because they can actually manage even if the oxygen-rich and carbon dioxide blood are mixing together. But us mammals, especially humans, can't afford that to happen. So this 4-chambered heart is highly essential to our existence, and any damage to any one of these chambers could have serious implications towards our health. So this is just a brief, more of an outlook towards the next video, a call to action for the next video. Transportation in plants. So plants are quite similar to humans, and they also have waste, nutrients, and water that has to be transported in and out of the body. However, plants don't have blood, and they don't have a heart either, so you may be wondering how this mechanism takes place. So in plants, the mechanism takes place through 2 vessels known as xylem and phloem, which we'll be looking at right now. The xylem vessel transports water and minerals from the soil to various parts of the plant, which is why it's only transported in an upward direction. When we water the plants, the water is primarily absorbed by the soil, and then the roots, which are underground, absorb the water from the soil and take it up in one direction, up the stem, and it's divided between the various different leaves of the plant. So just keep in mind that xylem transports water and minerals from the soil, and it only moves in one direction, upward. No, so you might have already guessed that phloem transports food materials, and food can actually be transported upward and downward because there are storage units known as companion cells. So xylem is correlated with the transport of water, and phloem correlates with the transport of food materials. So this movement of water and nutrients through the xylem and phloem vessels has a special name, and it's called translocation. So that concludes this video. I hope you had a wonderful learning experience and got a much better overview of how our heart works. Stay tuned for part 2, in which we'll be diving deeper into transportation in plants and also assessing another important component of blood, which is lymph. So stay tuned for that. As always, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with any of your friends that might enjoy a similar learning experience. And until the next video, this is Ch.6 signing off. Peace.